Hi, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to day 50. 50 days. I'm not really sure my brain fully accepts this number yet, but it's just been a wonderful trip so far, and I'm looking forward to the next 50 and the ones after that. Of course, before I really get rolling, I'm going to start with today's t-shirt, which I could almost call an appropriately lucky shirt today. I knew I was going to be prepared, and I pulled an old t-shirt of Scar out. I love my Scar shirt. I've loved Scar for a long time. When this project started, I thought this was mostly going to be learning some notes and some breathing, learning some arrangement, some technique, and pulling stuff together and learning how not to embarrass myself in the process publicly. And so far, all of those things are still happening. But increasingly, this journey is becoming something much stranger than I originally expected, because so much of what I'm learning lately no longer feels like isolated technical problem solving anymore. It feels more like slowly uncovering hidden organizational mysteries, rules underneath how the voice itself wants to function when it's working correctly. And today may have been one of the strongest examples of that. This morning I started with Brighter. And honestly, the session unfolded in a progression that, in hindsight, almost perfectly followed the following sequence. And I've got my notes here. Calibrate, evaluate, listen, hear, attempt, epiphany, implementation, and repetition. Yeah, I know, that's just a long stretch, but so there was a breakthrough. And what is funny is that the breakthrough itself didn't happen because I sat down trying to solve this giant problem or this abstract vocal mystery. It all started because one single word just didn't flow right for me. And that word was gotta. There was actually sort of a second one that was Rome, but between those two, they just didn't fit right. They didn't sound right. And every take, they'd stand out. And it's, it's harsh because a lot of it is beginning to sort of come together, except that you've got these 2 points there that just go wrong. So it's stepping outside the phrase, but the rest of the phrase is okay. It's not destroying the line. It doesn't collapse performance, because at this point, up until, there was no performance. But enough that every time it happened, I could obviously hear the vocal color temporarily disconnect from larger emotional stuff surrounding it. So my original purpose today was honestly very practical. I wanted to go back to the reference track and specifically listen to how CB handles that word and try to understand why it sits differently inside the phrase. I wasn't trying to imitate. I wasn't trying to replicate. What I was trying to do is understand, in relation to everything else he's doing, how does that word not stick out like a sore thumb? While I was listening, something much larger suddenly surfaced underneath it. Honestly, I think this ends up becoming one of the more important realizations I've had anywhere in this journey so far. I thought I was simply just trying to study the placement of the support or the color. I realized what I was hearing underneath all of it. And it wasn't that the reference wasn't just emotionally pushing isolated phrases correctly. I was actually listening to how does he keep it linked? And I heard it. He was maintaining one continuous energetic intention underneath the entire phrase structure. It wasn't that he was going like this or this. He would take those words and sail into them, sail through them, and sail out of them. And weirdly enough, I think that may have been the first moment where I truly understood the difference between listening and hearing. Earlier sessions have repeatedly circled around words like continuity or flow, linkage I used a little earlier, steering. This morning, I finally heard what was actually not surviving, but being cultivated underneath all of those things. And they're not disconnected emotional pushes. They're not isolated support events. They're not individual technical moments being manually assembled phrase by phrase. Just one continuous line of energy traveling underneath the entire structure, almost like a monorail. And that relation clicked something in me. I had just done 2 calibration takes, and I was just being annoyed by those words. But I went back to do another take because I figured I'm done with calibration. I heard this, and the next take really changed. And not because the singing suddenly became solved. No, absolutely not. Still a way to go. But for the first time, the energy felt continuously maintained instead of repeatedly having tiny little collapses that I had to figure out how to bring them back to rebuild the whole phrase. The following take became one of the clearest, brighter moments I've had yet because the entire thing carried that one uninterrupted energy line. The thread was tied to both ends. Now, yeah, still 1 or 2 words that needed adjustment, mostly because there are certain notes you have to modify the vowel so that it doesn't stretch the sound of the word. And for another reference to Hazbin Hotel, I need to clean it up. And those of you know what I'm talking. If you know, you know. But honestly, that itself became another huge realization. The stronger continuity doesn't hide little flaws. It actually illuminates them. And the wonderful thing was, instead of me trying to figure out where in this area something's going wrong, when I listen to it through continuous energy, I can go, that is what is needing adjustment. Once the surrounding structure finally begins fitting together correctly, the remaining outliers suddenly become painfully obvious against the coherence of everything surrounding them. And emotionally, I think that's a really healthy shift. I mean, earlier in this project, a flaw often felt like, well, that all went wrong and I sound horrible. Now the flaws increasingly feel more like everything else is stabilized and I just have to identify these little things and clean them up. And that is an amazing progress just in 50 days. And honestly, one of the healthiest parts of the entire morning happened after the breakthrough itself. Once the stronger take appeared, the second one stopped being about push harder and force it again. Instead, it became just watch what's happening. observe it carefully enough to determine whether it was reproducible or accidental. And that distinction matters a lot right now. So that final take stayed lighter. Less pressure, less chasing, and more, can I consciously get this same energetic process without gripping the system too hard? It's not a question of making the energy do what it did before. It's making the system set up the same way it's set up before so that the system can push the energy out correctly. And surprisingly, the answer to all this increasingly seems to be yes. It's not automatic at this point. It is definitely not automatic. I've been talking about stepping back from it, not consciously thinking about it. This required concentration. This actually required me to intentionally hold my body in a very strong postured position. So there was very active awareness and maintenance of that energy line. But the thing was, it was going to stay straight. And the really important thing was that the access logic, that itself remained understandable. I got how I got to that point. It wasn't, I've stumbled upon something. It's, I have found this path and it leads to here. And I actually remembered how to travel that path. But the really important thing was that it was just completely thrown for a moment. I want to just try to narrow it down. It was an endpoint that was reachable. And it wasn't just reachable, it was relocatable. Honestly, I think that may be one of the biggest distinctions between a random accident and developing a coordination principle. Because this no longer feels like it briefly happened for a few notes. I commented yesterday about the first 5 notes of this one passage sounded good enough to be put on an album. This wasn't something 5 notes. This was the whole body. This was the whole piece. It increasingly feels like the body may finally recognize the full mechanism well enough to gradually begin converting it into long-term muscle memory. And that, for me, is a complete goal. Because then I stop thinking and I can be more aware of the performance aspect. The really exciting part was what that realization immediately suggested for the rest of the week or the weekend. I was doing Be Prepared later, and I thought, probably for the first time, that some of the continuity and linkage problems that I have been fighting over in Be Prepared and even more in Boulevard might not actually be isolated mysteries at all. I may not get there quite as quickly because it might have been easier depending on the range. But there may finally be an identifiable underlying principle that I have now seen sitting under and supporting. And the Be Prepared session ended up testing that theory almost immediately. So I have now shifted my Be Prepared work because most of the piece is solid. I know I'm still working on positioning bass notes, but the rest of the piece, I know it, I know how to perform it, I know how to change the performance. I have been avoiding the octave hop. So that is where I'm starting to dedicate my attention. Basically, at this point on, it's not a question of when the little voice says, go for it, go for it. It is now, you want to get as close to the original arrangement as you can. Can you do this? And I walked into the octave hop construction zone. But importantly, the experiment was no longer just, can I hit the octave? The real question for me, of course, from the previous session became, can the sustained energy, holding sustained intention, holding sustained continuity, survive traveling through unstable scaffolding in an area that's not fully built without throwing everything on the ground? And honestly, the first take immediately did something that generally startled me. I assess something from how it feels, and then I go to the playback. Before I even got to analyzing the octave hop itself, the overall continuity of the performance, it held together in a way that completely caught me off guard. I mean, I came out of it, and the first thought I had was a long pause, one expletive, and another long pause. And I'm saying that because I'm still young on the channel and I don't want to get censored. The vocal color I have been trying to get close to for a long time. I've talked about not liking the color of the sound, trying to dial it in just right. Not only did it appear, it was there the entire time. And it was, maybe I'm over-exaggerating by permanently, but for the most part, it was there the whole time. And from the opening, middle section, the energy was a straight line. And the reason I say middle section is because in Be Prepared, Scar sings the first half barely interrupted. Once you get to the second half, it's where the hyenas have more interjections, so Scar stops singing for a few moments. And I had to hold that energy without anything happening. And that was an interesting new experience. Of course, this happens on a day where the bass was offline. So, I'm sitting there going, be prepared. Nothing. Part of that was probably my own fault because mentally I came in thinking I was doing Boulevard, and I didn't do the warm-ups I typically do for Be Prepared, primarily because with Be Prepared I'm going down, and with Boulevard I'm going up. So maybe the bass could have been a little stronger if I prepped a little better. But intellectually and emotionally, the absence of the bass system nothing collapses. The performance just keeps going. And even as no note comes out, that energy is still there. And it pretty much continued the way I would have expected it to. And I think seeing it happen in Brighter and carrying it through into Be Prepared, something is structurally changing. Okay, let's talk about the octave hop. It's unstable. I'm unstable, but we go hand in hand. I was on the first shot sliding up into the notes, and I kind of overshot it and fell into place. But I got there, and then pretty much those two lines were on note. They were squeezed and compressed and not really following any energy line other than you be where you're supposed to go. But the realization wasn't the instability. It was the fact that it got there, it went there, everything leading up to that point was on the energy beam, and everything coming out of it fell back onto that energy line. I was able to keep in my mind what was going on. And that added to the continuity of the octave hop. That's really huge because those are notes that are similar to Boulevard, which I haven't gotten to yet. Earlier versions of this process often behaved like just one unstable transition equals having to find my way home again. Now this unstable point itself can be there while the larger expanse around it completely stays in full structure, and that is radically different from how my rehearsals have been up until now. The second one had some other interesting behavior because I didn't want to just repeat. I wanted to understand how this mechanism could move. One of the things that's been consistent, even on Be Prepared, is that I punch over the backing vocals. They always are in a different room. And I've talked about in the past the idea that, well, that's mixed by somebody who is a professional engineer, and I'm just sort of along for the ride. I found that in that second take, I was refining. I wanted to hold the energy level, but lower my volume, so that I'm putting out sound with, I guess, the same energy, but I'm putting out a quieter version of it. And that worked. And for the first time, if you haven't guessed where we're going with this, the vocals started feeling like it existed in the same room as the backing vocals, but it still had a little bit of a peak to make it the lead vocal in the room. That unto itself is beyond the goal that was beyond the goal. It's really quite humbling, actually. The octave hop the second time through also improved in an interesting way. Once I reached the beginning of the transition, I relaxed into it. I focused on the energy, and I opened up. I relaxed, and it opened up the upper note more cleanly. It was still a reach, it was still a squeeze, but it was definitely stronger as a formulated note. And that lesson that's been beating me in the head for I don't know how many episodes now, it just compressed into one simple mechanical moment. And that lesson that I keep getting told is the more I force it, the worse it behaves. But the more I maintain that line and allow the mechanism to line naturally, the more the voice increasingly organizes itself correctly. For the first time, that octave transition itself no longer feels random. Yes, it feels like I'm shifting gears. And in some ways, I think I have to, because I'm probably going from chest to some form of mix. I'm not sure. I'm still learning that kind of terminology. But I could consciously feel it lining up mechanically instead of merely hoping it would be there. The downward transition afterwards still immediately dropped back into the region, and the bass system said, no, I'm still not here. So yes, yeah, okay, not solved, not mastered, not arriving just yet, but honestly, the larger emotional difference today was that the entire process, it stopped feeling like I was grinding gears and burning out a clutch. It started feeling more like I could delicately change the equation. And the idea of having the ability to consciously manipulate and not lose, very different relationship with the music, with my voice. Now, by the end of that session, fatigue was not a question. It was definitely there. I was holding on to so much energy and trying to keep it locked into one specific area. But the fatigue did not frustrate me. It just told me, yeah, you're done. I did walk away thinking that, okay, I had this much energy and I was able to lower the volume. Do I actually need this much energy? Is it just a question of I can lower the energy as well as long as I keep that line going? And that's an experiment for the next 50 days. But I think one of the biggest victories overall, and to celebrate day 50, everything feels increasingly less like I'm surviving catastrophic interruption points. It feels more like learning how to navigate a traversable terrain that simply still contains a couple of unstable sections. It was a day. There's no way I can say anything but. But if it's going to happen on any day, I think day 50 was kind of cool. It still feels a little surreal to have been putting out 50 videos. And I genuinely want to thank everyone who has been following this evolving journey with me, because I really wasn't trolling for subscribers. I obviously I wanted to share with people who were interested, but I've been surprised by the people who are attaching to this. I've been surprised by the number, not the people. Big difference. And it really makes me happy that I'm able to connect on some of these levels. Even if you're just watching like the intro and deciding maybe this isn't for me, at least you open the door. And that's kind of cool too. I really didn't expect people to really wait while someone reverse engineered their own singing voice in public in real time. But if you're watching this, you are. And thank you. Just simply thank you. If you think anybody else might be interested in this, feel free to pass it on. Like button, comment button. I'm not trolling an algorithm. Tomorrow, Saturday, becomes day 51. However, before I jump off, I do need to say that I am actually going away for my first weekend since starting this thing next weekend. And I'm going to bring equipment with me, and I'm going to try to practice, but I'm not quite sure what will be posted. I'm hoping I do get to post something. But that's the weekend. I've still got 6 or 7 days ahead of me, because the weekend's just starting. So until we come back tomorrow, later.